Hi, I'm Izzy Gentry. Welcome back to Made to Walk. Today we are going to be walking through anti-trafficking education. This is something that we developed to be shared with crisis centers in trainings. And so I wanted to record it so that it would be easy and accessible to all nonprofits and NGOs. So, the first thing I want to point out about sex trafficking is that it is a very specific niche of sexual abuse, and every single niche of sexual abuse needs to be dealt with very specifically and differently because they deal with different kinds of coercion and so on and so forth. And we'll kind of get into the nitty gritty about that. But the one that we have here in Smith County, I really enjoy working with them because they have a long history of just being prepared and capable to deal with this. So the executive director has a long history of forensics investigation with children. The advocates have a long history of dealing with those with mental illness, and the counselors are LPCs. So they have the people who are trained and equipped to be able to handle this kind of work. Their mission statement is working to end sex trafficking and exploitation by empowering the voices of vulnerable and exploited youth. The next thing I do in my trainings is that I start with true or false. I absolutely hate doing trainings that are just me talking at people for like 2 hours or longer. So we start with a little bit of engagement. So the first question is, human trafficking is always or usually a violent crime, true or false? Hopefully you answered false. The most pervasive myth about human trafficking is that it often involves kidnapping or physical force someone into a situation. In reality, most traffickers use psychological means such as tricking, defrauding, manipulating, or threatening victims into providing commercial sex or exploitive labor. True or false? Human trafficking involves moving, traveling, or transporting a person across state or national borders. The answer to that is false. Human trafficking is often confused with human smuggling. When we talk about um, what trafficking is today, we like to say that the phone is the new white van. So oftentimes a person will actually use grooming and coercion to manipulate a person for a long period of time online and get them to involve themselves in exploitation or even willingly run away. And it takes a long time for them to build up that kind of trust to be able to get that kind of engagement. And so, am I going to say that it doesn't happen, that people are snatched and taken across borders? No, I'm not going to say that. But what I will say is that oftentimes here in America, we see that our individuals are being exploited and pulled into trafficking using social media. We'll talk about the border crisis here in just a second as well. So, true or false? If the trafficked person consented to be in their initial situation, then it cannot be human trafficking or against their will because they knew better. Hopefully, your answer is false. So, there's something called the Romeo effect in trafficking. Romeo pimps are identified as an individual's type of boyfriend. So, they actually think they're in some type of relationship. That person uses a lot of love bombing, gifting. They can go to great extents to give them things that make them feel very important. And then what they do is they kind of flip the switch at some point. So maybe they gift them a Louis Vuitton and really nice clothes and nice dinners, and then they say, "Hey, I'm running kind of low on money, but just until I get back on my feet, you think you could do this one thing for me, just so we can make some quick cash?" They actually think they're doing their boyfriend a favor. They don't see themselves as being sexually exploited. They don't see themselves as being trafficked, and it actually can be a very long time before they realize that they're in a bad situation, because over time he'll isolate her more and more and more, and he'll dictate how much food she can eat, where she can go, what she can wear, how many times a week she has to perform particular acts in order to earn some of these things back. True or false? People in active trafficking situations always want help getting out. The answer to this is false. Again, back to that Romeo effect. Sometimes they are completely in a false reality due to grooming, that they don't know they're in a bad situation. Sometimes they've left a worse situation. And so this is the best situation they've ever been in. They don't know that it's bad. It's all they've known. Or maybe they had a parent that was in the trafficking industry. So maybe a dad was a pimp or a mom was trafficked or prostitution, so this is very normal for them. But they use fear, isolation, guilt, shame, misplaced loyalty, and expert manipulation. These are among the many factors that may keep a person from seeking help or identifying themselves as a victim, even if they are, in fact, being actively trafficked. So, what is human trafficking exactly? The definition is the unlawful act of transporting or coercing people in order to benefit from their work or service, typically in the form of forced labor or sexual exploitation. So, the three categories that we define these things through is fraud, force, or coercion. Fraud is wrongful or criminal deception intended to result in financial or personal gain. A person or thing intended to deceive others, typically unjustifiably claiming credited or um, accomplishments and qualities. Sorry, it kind of cuts off on my slide. So, again, they play into whatever kind of insecurity that they have. They feed that. Like they're going to be all the things. So if they're seeking attention, they'll give them attention. If they're seeking escape, they'll get them out of whatever situation they're in. If they are needing sensory, they'll give them lots of physical touch and bonding, and they'll do a lot of love bombing. And so it creates this fraudulent trust over time. And then comes force. So force is essentially strength or energy as an attribute of physical action or movement, coercion, or compulsion, especially with the use or threat of violence. This includes physical restraint, physical harm, sexual assault, and beatings. Monitoring and confinement is often used to control victims, especially during early stages of victimization and breakdown of the victim's resistance. So one of the sicker things that I've had to hear about is like when a child is being held and being forced to do these things. What they'll do is when they've had to go through a really difficult situation, they'll give them a puppy, kind of like a therapy pet. They get very attached to the puppy, and then they say, okay, well, if you don't go do what we tell you to do, then we'll kill the puppy. And sometimes they even kill the puppy to show them that they really will, and then give them another one. We often will get the question, why don't these people scream for help? Why don't they, call out to someone when they're in public? Well, because sometimes it can be their manipulation and their mental breakdown could be so far down this rabbit hole, they don't want to leave their puppy behind. Like they don't want to leave a friend behind, or they don't want to leave something special that they've become attached to behind. And so they'll continue to not say anything in public so they can get back home to their puppy. These are the kinds of things that make it just so difficult to swallow. Coercion, the practice of persuading someone to do something by using force or threats, including threats of serious harm or restraint against any person, psychological manipulation, document confiscation, and shame and fear, including threats to share information or pictures with others and even reporting them to the authorities. So, they're very good. They're very good at keeping people scared and intimidated so that they don't come forward and say anything. Understand your region, understand what the threat is in your region. I live in East Texas. I understand that we are part of the Texas Triangle. One of the most difficult things for us to deal with here in Tyler is that we are a great small town, essentially small enough for people to kind of go through from Shreveport to Houston on a back road, so they don't have to go through any major city checkpoints, which makes it very likely for them to be able to move people through here, either through human smuggling or trafficking. So we're very aware and we are very much on alert, and we do a lot of trainings with our police department and our first responders to make sure that they know and understand what trafficking is and how it works. So how does it happen? It starts with a luring process. Again, this is meeting those behavioral aspects I talked about in our youth group training. If you haven't watched that, go back and circle back around to that. But essentially, when a person identifies a weakness, when they have an identifying factor, it may be that they've just recently lost someone, they're in this CPS system, they are in foster care, they feel very insecure about themselves. There's many different attributes that they can use to their advantage, and then they begin to groom them. They lure them into the conversation, and then they start to groom them in that process by being all those things that they hope to have in life. And then they start to isolate them from individuals. Your mom just doesn't get you. I get you. You're so smart for your age. You're so beautiful for your age. You should run away and be with me. And so they isolate them from the situation. And through manipulation and coercion, they actually get them to participate in exploitation. So then they really get them in guilt and shame because they feel like it's their fault. They feel like they're the ones that they willingly went to this person, and sometimes it's often very scary for them to get out of it because they feel that shame. So who is at risk? I actually hate this list because I feel like someone's going to look at this list and be like, "Oh, okay, I'm not on the list of people who can be at risk." You'd be surprised how many. Like I know it says like low income on here somewhere, but you will be surprised how many very wealthy, very established families, kids with good parents, people with lots of staff, lots of resources, good school, uh, have their kids in sports, end up in these particular exploitation situations because it's just it can be very much a part of the process of the emotional aspect. This person meets an emotional need that they need, and so again, just feeding into that behavioral part of it. But pretty much anybody that's looking for community. So if you are living with some kind of lifestyle that is, you feel discluded, you feel isolated, you're looking for someone to see you and notice you, then obviously they're going to use that. Adverse childhood trauma. This is very much a key factor. So if someone has already experienced some kind of sexual trauma, whether it was in the home, whether it's a secret that they've been keeping, this is something that very much is a physical factor. And so I'll talk about that here in just a second. So they may have been experiencing violence, abuse, neglect, witnessing violence in the home or community, having a family member attempt or die by suicide, like anything traumatic that a person has gone through. So what happens is when a person has gone through trauma and they haven't processed the trauma, they wear the trauma, and it's very visible to a predator, just like you would see a sheep that has a broken leg. That's the one the wolf is most likely to prey on because, well, they're not as capable of running away. It's the same kind of process. So if you are noticing that a child is sitting in the corner, isolated, slumped shoulders, not making eye contact, pulling on their sleeves over their wrists, dealing with some anger issues, rage issues, which is typically anxiety associated to PTSD, all of these things can be a show factor as an opportunity. If no one else is paying attention to that kid, a predator is going to use that and immediately engage with that particular situation. Individual and family risk factors. So, identifying what are some of the key things that you should be looking at. Again, these are people who are isolated in their particular life. They're isolated from their particular capabilities. So, if they are dealing with special needs, they may feel isolated from being part of their community. If you are being raised by like a single mother and your mom has to work 3 jobs, it's just an opportunity for them to go, okay, like someone's not paying attention to this kid, use this to my advantage. Kids are very, very open about this particular information. I'm always home alone. I'm bored. Oh, your mom works 3 jobs. That must suck for you. Yeah, I never get to do anything. Sometimes they share on like Life 360 their location at all times. When they are out in public places, they'll tell that person to meet them because, again, they feel like this is a romantic engagement, that this is a potential boyfriend, someone who wants to give them all of that attention. So, again, just be conscientious of whatever you find. This is part of the premortem thinking. Whatever you find to be a potential weak point, you've got to lean into that. You've got to know, okay, this is a weak point with this kid, and we need to build that up and we need to fill in that hole so that the enemy doesn't use it to his advantage. How to identify trafficking. So common questions. Now, you will be surprised how emboldened these people are. They're not going to be like lurking in the corners. They will walk in very proudly to event centers and so on and so forth. And so don't mm, ever tell yourself, well, like surely they wouldn't be just sitting here in the middle of a restaurant. Yes, they would. Absolutely, 100%. They will take them in public places. They'll reward them by like if the one girl does very good, she may get the special dinner that week and he'll take her to a restaurant. So if you see that an individual is being isolated from their friends and family all of a sudden, maybe they've got a new boyfriend, and oh, ever since so and so got a new boyfriend, they're not engaging with anyone anymore. There's inconsistent attendance to school. So attendance does not work like how it did in the 60s, where knock, 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 someone comes to your door. Hey, Sally did not come to school today. It's actually just like a voicemail that they get. Well, they get a voicemail about everything. You get a voicemail about your kid has a balance in the cafeteria, your kid's missing a library book, your kid is missing a permission slip, your kid is, so they don't really pay attention to these, especially if you are not a very self-aware parent. And so, I've heard about cases where they're actually picked up from the bus stop and dropped off at the bus stop. Parents never know that they never went to school and they're actually being trafficked for that time. So if they are appearing fearful or timid, like if they're very conscientious of their phone, like they won't let you see it, or they're starting to have heart palpitations, if like they're like constantly checking it to see when they're going to get a message, these are telltales that something is at the very least in a very abusive situation. Someone else is constantly making decisions for them. So if the boyfriend is carrying the wallet, her ID, her money, her phone, everything, never allowed to go anywhere without this person, it's usually a telltale. Uh, if you have frequent travel outside of cities, again, if you've gone to any of my trainings, you will identify the fact that if we find someone here in this county, they're likely not from this county. And if we identify that somebody is missing from our county, we're going to find them in a different county, because it just doesn't make sense to traffic them in an area where they could potentially be seen by someone they may know. Behaviors not congruent with the social economic levels. So if you see a kid that clearly lives in a trailer park and is walking around with a Louis Vuitton or a wad of cash, ask questions. If you see branding, tattoo marks on their body, especially numbers, there's something out there called pimpology. It is a book that is used by pimps as much as Christians use the Bible. And they refer to the rules in there, and sometimes they tattoo the rules on their girls or brand their girls. So keep in mind if you see anything, any kind of relative marks to that regard. Signs or concerns of abuse in children. So if we're dealing with ages 0 to 5, you may be dealing with irritability, clinginess, regression, and developmental milestones such as toilet training, bedwetting, eating and communication skills, playing and using imagination to process what happened, questions about death. School children from 6 to 12, they could be worried about other kids' safety, especially siblings or younger children in the home. They could be dealing with guilt or shame. So oftentimes they'll be very skittish of other parents and like, why is that kid going with that person? Like, where are they going? Where are they going? Where are they going? They become very protective because they've gone through something and they are scared other people are dealing with it as well. 13 to 18, they could be dealing with depression, isolation from others, feeling alone, self-harming behaviors, including cutting, eating disorders, risky behaviors, and an increase in sexual activity. So if you see a dramatic change in a teen where they're just very sexually active, all of a sudden they're almost like screaming it from a rooftop, all of the things that they're doing, I would very much question if they have gone through a some kind of sexual assault or sexual abuse in their home, or in their life, because it can be a formula for them to be taking over what they would consider to be like, I'm taking back my sexuality by like deciding like I want to have it and like I want to do these things, like I'm choosing to instead of someone else choosing it for me. And so very much the only correction to that is to process whatever trauma they have experienced, and for them to deassociate control from their sexual being. So they have to learn how to understand what they can control and what they can't control, and being able to live comfortably in the space of identifying how to put in safety boundaries and things to that regard, or they could be looking to be abused again in this environment. So terms that we commonly used in association to buying, we talked about, I mean, most people know what a pimp is. We talked about what a Romeo pimp is. Now, a bottom is something that is very unique to trafficking because she is typically a female who has been trafficked herself for many years. This is like a bump up in leadership. So she's actually there to control the girls. She's actually there to control any children. If you saw the Freedom movie that came out, the woman who lures the kids in through the modeling agency, that would be considered a bottom. So this is very typical. She is there to exchange money, to, make them quote unquote feel safe in doing what they're doing. And so when someone gets arrested, it's typically the bottom first. And she is there to make sure that the organization's bottom doesn't fall out, because she can get blamed for a lot of things. And the pimp can say, well, I never participated in that. I don't know what she was doing. So it's a fallout. So emojis and abbreviations. I won't get into the abbreviations. I just don't think that it's appropriate outside of law enforcement to identify what the abbreviations mean. However, please be conscientious of today's society. The kids are using emojis as a formulation of communicating to others what their intent is. So they use them oftentimes in their social media profile and in their communication. And sometimes they can um, be very intentional on saying, these are my greatest assets, and this is what I'm willing to do, and this is how much willing to charge. And when they charge, it's not going to be like, you're going to pay me such and such amount of money for such and such act. It's going to be, this abbreviation means whatever sexual act, and it's going to have a very specific time. So for this amount of time, and then it'll say a donation of such and such amount of money. And that's what donation means. Fresh means underage. So if they say, hey, she's blonde and she's blue-eyed and she's fresh, that means she's underage. They may ask for like a double special, which means like they are able to identify a person that they are soliciting, and they'll say, hey, if the second girl can be fresh. And that tells them, oh, they want me to bring someone underage. They want me to bring someone else with me. So this is typically language that we use when we are out there doing sting operations. We have to know these kinds of things. And obviously, we're not even to the deepest extent of what our task force are trained on, but it is very helpful to be familiar what some of these words mean, because when you are interviewing or eliciting information from a trafficking victim, if they start to use some of these words and you're like, I have no idea what any of this means, I don't know what they're talking about. What is a bottom? Like, what is a donation? Who are they donating money to? Like, it can be very confusing. So these are just helpful terms for you when you have a conversation who's gone through trafficking. So what do we do with what we know? If you're new to Made to Walk, you may not have heard of the ID program, but I talk about it a lot. But essentially, it is identify, define, discern, and decide. So identifies signs and symptoms apart from a person's baseline. So again, those fine detail changes in a person's behavior. Define the threat, details, and direct people involved. So how much information can I gather? And then discern what resources would be most effective for this individual. So, and for this particular situation, working with an NGO unit that is trained in this process. You're never going to start. And again, go back to watching my advocacy extraction tools, because you never want to start with like sin and asking for forgiveness and defining the other person as a bad guy. Like, these are all things that are actually not really helpful. They're actually going to make the person very defensive and actually not want to be extracted at all. You have to do this in a very slow, very meticulous process. So again, if you are not trained in the process, it's better for you to call an NGO specialist who can come out and actually help in the communication than for you to try to do it on your own. Because it's a very tricky process. Sometimes they very much have told themselves like, this is a life choice that I've made. Um, and sometimes they see themselves as an individual that doesn't need to explain anything. It'll throw you for a loop. I'll just say that. Sometimes you will get the most like cutthroat, argumentative, in your face, because they've had to learn how to be like this in order to thrive and survive. Is that being a victim is only going to get you beat. So they are very tough on the outside and they're very defensive on the inside. And so it takes a great deal of expertise in being able to have these conversations that go in a productive way. And sometimes we can say things that we think are helpful, but actually just make the person very shut off and defensive. So if you're a church member and you are dealing with this, again, make sure that you understand and know the resources to call and involve in these particular situations. I hope this training was helpful for you, and I look forward to doing more with you guys.